There is a piece of pork in a wok right now, somewhere in this city, turning to leather. The cook did everything the cookbook told him. Hot oil, fast hands, thin slices against the grain. And it still came out dry, because the cookbook left out the one step that actually matters. The step that got pulled out of professional kitchens on purpose, almost 50 years ago, and was never put back. I have a jar of cloudy water sitting on the shelf above my own wok station. No label, no brand, costs less than a cup of coffee to make. 1 spoonful of that water, 20 minutes of rest, and a cut of meat that has no business staying tender under high heat, stays tender anyway. This is not a marinade trick. This is not a seasoning packet. It is chemistry that restaurant supply companies do not want printed on the side of their tenderizer bags, because if you knew how to make it yourself, you would stop buying theirs. My name is Alex Wong. I trained for 11 years under a master who corrected me with the flat of his cleaver against the cutting board more often than he ever told me I had done something right. I left an office job to stand at that wok station, and there were mornings in the first 2 years I questioned that decision badly. In those 11 years, I plated meat dishes by the tens of thousands, and in all that time, not one came back to the pass dry, because the very first lesson my master drilled into me had nothing to do with heat or timing. It had to do with this water. What should bother you is this. The method got buried out of professional kitchens deliberately when the country standardized commercial cooking in the 1970s, replaced with sealed powders that any untrained cook could measure with a spoon. Home kitchens kept doing it anyway, because grandmothers do not read regulations. By the end of this, you will know exactly what is in that jar, how to make it for less than $2, and why it works at the level of the meat's actual chemistry. Let me start with what almost everyone gets wrong, because if you skip this part, nothing else here will help you. Most people who have looked into this even a little have heard of velveting, the technique of coating raw meat in cornstarch and egg white before a quick blanch, then the real stir-fry. That method is real. I use it myself, every shift, but it solves the wrong half of the problem, and that is exactly why so many home cooks try it once, get a slightly better result, and still wonder why their meat never tastes like the meat from the kitchen down the street. Velveting builds a coat on the outside of the meat, a jacket. It protects what is already inside from losing too much moisture too fast, but it does nothing to change what is happening inside the muscle fiber itself, and that is where the real damage occurs. When raw meat hits a wok at full heat, the proteins inside the muscle clench, the way a wet rag tightens when you wring it with both hands, and that clenching forces the water out from between the fibers. Once that water is gone, no amount of cornstarch jacket on the outside brings it back. You can armor a piece of meat perfectly, and it will still turn dry on the inside, because the armor was never the problem. The problem is what the heat does to the protein structure underneath it, and that structure has to be changed before the meat ever touches the pan, not protected after the fact. This is the part the velveting trend skips entirely, and it is the part that separates a kitchen that has been doing this for decades from a home cook following a recipe card. My master never once mentioned cornstarch in my first year of training. He made me work with the water first, until I understood what it was doing, and only then did he let me touch the egg, white and starch. Order matters. Skip the water step and the rest is decoration. Now here is the part that explains the word buried in this episode's title, and I want to walk you through it plainly, because there is nothing mystical about it. Before commercial kitchens were standardized under a single approved list of additives, household kitchens across the country relied on alkaline water made from wood ash. Burn hardwood, collect the cooled ash, pour water through it slowly, let it filter and settle, and what comes out the other side is a mild alkaline solution. It was used for softening tough cuts before they ever touched fire, for giving rice dumplings their characteristic bounce, for setting the texture in preserved foods that needed a firmer structure than plain water could give. It sat in kitchens the way a bottle of cooking wine sits in a kitchen now, unremarkable, always there. When the country moved towards standardized commercial canteens and regulated restaurant supply chains in the 1970s, that variable, household-made solution did not survive the transition. Every batch of ash water differed, depending on the wood, the burn, how long it sat, and a regulated kitchen wanted the same result on a Tuesday that it got on a Friday. So the ash water got replaced with sealed bags of standardized tenderizing powder, and monosodium glutamate blends. Easy to measure, easy to teach to a cook who had never apprenticed under anyone for more than a few weeks. The old method did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because nobody could put a barcode on it. It survived in homes precisely because grandmothers were never filling out compliance paperwork. And it survived in the handful of kitchens, like the one I trained in, where the master had no interest in buying what he could make himself for free. So what is actually happening to the meat? Because I want you to understand this as a fact about protein chemistry, not as a piece of inherited folklore you have to take on faith. Raw muscle tissue sits at a pH somewhere around 5.5 to 6, which is mildly acidic, and in that state the protein structure is tight, almost clenched, which is exactly why it squeezes out moisture so violently the second high heat hits it. Raise that pH even slightly, push it up toward 8 or 9 using a mild alkaline solution, and the protein structure relaxes and swells. The fibers open up, hold more water instead of less, and critically, they keep holding that water even after the temperature spikes past 400 degrees. This is documented food chemistry, the same principle behind why hand-pulled alkaline noodles have that springy, resistant bite that plain wheat noodles never achieve. It is not the meat getting younger or softer in some vague sense. It is a measurable shift in water-holding capacity at the molecular level, and it happens whether you believe in it or not. The same way a hinge swings, whether you understand the physics of a lever or not. Before you start picturing drain cleaner over your dinner, I need to be precise here, because this is exactly where careless instructions ruin people's trust in the method. You are not using lye. Lye is a strong caustic alkali, the kind used in soap making, and it requires real expertise to handle safely. What you want is sodium carbonate, a much gentler alkaline salt, and the good news is, you already own the raw material for it. Ordinary baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. Spread it in a thin, even layer on a baking sheet and bake it at 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. The heat drives off water vapor and carbon dioxide and converts it into sodium carbonate, the same family of compound the old kitchens were filtering out of wood ash, except now you control it precisely in your own oven for the price of a box of baking soda that runs about $2. You will lose roughly 1/3 of the original weight in that hour if you weigh it before and after, and what is left will taste noticeably more alkaline, almost soapy on the tongue in tiny amounts, which is exactly the sign it has converted properly. Once you have your baked soda cooled and stored in a sealed jar, the working solution is simple. Dissolve about 1/4 teaspoon into 1 cup of warm water and stir until it disappears. That is the jar on my shelf. For 1 pound of sliced meat, use no more than 1 to 2 tablespoons of that solution, worked into the meat by hand the way you would massage in a marinade. Let it rest 15 to 20 minutes. You will feel the texture shift under your fingers before it ever sees heat, slightly firmer, slightly slick, the surface tightening the way dough tightens when you knead it past the shaggy stage. After the rest, rinse briefly under cool water, pat dry, then proceed exactly as you normally would. Cornstarch and egg white if that is your method, your usual soy and garlic and ginger, then a hot wok and fast hands. What comes out is meat that holds its moisture through the heat instead of fighting it. The same solution earns its place elsewhere in the kitchen once you understand the mechanism, because it is one principle doing the same job in different settings. A small splash worked into noodle dough gives you that resistant springy chew that separates hand-pulled noodles from a plain flour and water dough. The same alkaline effect bottled noodle mixes charge a premium for. A few drops added to the soaking water for dried mushrooms or wood ear fungus speeds, rehydration, and firms up the texture instead of leaving them soft and waterlogged. A light working into sliced daikon or cucumber before a quick pickle keeps the crunch intact for weeks instead of letting it go limp after 2 days. The same crispness you pay for in a restaurant pickle plate. One solution, one mechanism, used across a dozen dishes, the way a single sharp chisel earns its keep across a dozen different joints in a piece of furniture. I want to be honest about the limits too. More is not better here. Oversoak the meat or use too strong a ratio, and the texture turns slippery and almost soapy, the protein structure pushed past where you want it. 1/4 teaspoon per cup, a short rest, a rinse afterward, that is the entire recipe, and going past it ruins dinner rather than improving it. Keep the dry baked soda labeled and sealed, away from anything a child might mistake for sugar, the same ordinary caution you would use with any kitchen chemical that is harmless in the correct dose. And never confuse this mild salt with actual lye. They are not the same substance, they are not handled the same way, and mixing them up in your head is exactly the kind of misunderstanding that gave this method an unfair reputation decades ago. Think about what you are actually being sold instead. A sealed bag of commercial meat tenderizer, sitting on a restaurant supply shelf, often does the same basic job as the jar on my counter, at several times the cost, with a brand name printed on it, and a reorder schedule built into the business model. There is no commission for anyone in a $2 box of baking soda you already own. There is a very real commission in a bag you have to buy again every month. My master used to say the people writing cookbooks for a living were rarely the people standing at a station during a packed dinner service, trying to keep 40 plates moving without a single one coming back dry, and the people who actually knew what worked were too busy working to write it down. I believe him more every year I stand at this station myself, so here is what I want you to do this week. Take half a cup of baking soda, spread it thin on a sheet, bake it at 250 degrees for 1 hour, let it cool, and store it sealed. Mix a quarter teaspoon into a cup of warm water. Take whatever cut you are cooking next, work in a tablespoon or two of that water, rest it 20 minutes, rinse, pat dry, and cook it exactly the way you always do. Tell me in the comments what you cooked and whether you noticed the difference, because I read every comment, and the people who come back after trying it are the reason I keep making these. Next time I want to show you the method my master used to keep a wok properly seasoned for 30 years, without ever once touching it with soap, which is the other half of why his food never tasted like anyone else's. Until then, keep your knife sharp, your wok hot, and remember that most of what the convenience generation pays for, somebody already solved decades ago with what was sitting in their own kitchen.